following story occurred on Halloween evening. This just happened a few hours ago. I have called and reported it to the police, and I am home safely, but guess I am still in shock. Could do with putting it down in writing to process it, and figured this is as good a place as any to share what happened. I finished work early today, and decided to go out for a run. I set out around 4:30, and decided my usual route, which crossed many roads, will not be very practical, and so I took an alternate route along a canal towpath and some pathways through woods that I knew would be less busy. Everything was going well. I was pushing myself steady until I got to a pathway on the way back around 6 kilometers into the route. It is a long, straight path with a canal on the left side, and on the right there is a wasteland where some factories used to be, but have mostly been demolished. It has been left abandoned for as long as I can remember and is overgrown with trees and weeds, but there are odd bits of an old factory that for some reason weren't fully demolished. As I got level with one part of the factory, which still had some old metal fire escape steps attached to it, I noticed a rough-looking guy sat on the wall with his legs hanging down. He jumped to his feet as he saw me coming and shouted something, but I couldn't make it out. As I came level to where he was, I heard him say, "Wait there, can you help me find my phone?" He said this while he was running down the steps, and so I stopped. As I got level with where the bottom of the steps were, meaning we were standing just a few feet apart, but with a fence in between us. It was a really old iron fence with vertical metal bars that have spikes at the top like you sometimes see around churches. He asked me if I would help him find his phone again, saying he had dropped it somewhere nearby, and asked if I could ring his number so we could listen for it. I felt I couldn't exactly refuse as my phone was strapped to my arm, so I said he could tell me the number, and I took my phone off my arm and unlocked it. He blurted out a phone number, but said it far too fast and it didn't begin with 07. This made me start to feel like something wasn't right. Although I was beginning to suspect something at this point, I wasn't really worried. I am in pretty good shape and had a big size and weight advantage over him. Plus, there was a fence between us. He didn't seem in very good physical shape and seemed like he might be homeless. I figured if he was trying to mug me for my phone, his only chance would be if he pulled a knife, so I made sure to stay a good distance away from the fence and kept my eye on where his hands were. So I told him I didn't catch any of the numbers because he said it too quickly, and he came out with another number. This time it did have 07 at the beginning. I entered the 7 digits, and then he started to look around and say, "I can hear it. Come and help me look," as he looked around at the ground. I was about to say that I hadn't even finished dialing when a much larger guy appeared from behind a section of wall to my right. He was also really scruffy looking, and from the look of his eyes, it seemed like he was on drugs. He came out saying he could hear the phone ringing over towards him, and beckoned me to come through a gap in the fence and help him look. The other guy then said, "It is ringing, yeah." And I told him it was, even though I hadn't dialed the last digits, and now I was sure they were trying to lure me come over to that side of the fence. After 2 or 3 times of them both beckoning me to come and help, always insisting they could hear the ring, I heard the big guy say, "He's not going to fall for it." He said it in a hushed way, as if he thought I wouldn't hear, but with it being out in the middle of nowhere, I could clearly understand what he said. The other guy then started acting quite aggressive and punched a tree, telling me he needed the phone badly, and how his whole life was on that phone, telling me to come and help them look for it. While he was punching the tree and ranting, the big guy had taken a few steps away to the right, meaning I couldn't keep my eyes on both at the same time. It was after 5 p.m. by this point, and had gotten dark all of a sudden, which made the whole thing even more unsettling. I noticed there was a gap in the fence where some of the bars had been removed, right where the big guy was heading, and I decided at that point to get the hell out of there and made a run for it. Neither of them said anything as I ran away, which makes me sure that they had malicious intentions. If they genuinely lost their phone and needed help, I would expect them to shout, "Where are you going?" or something to try to get me to come back, but they didn't shout anything. After sprinting for a good 20 to 30 seconds, I turned to see if they were chasing me. They were just standing there watching me run away. I continued running away, but kept looking back every few seconds until I was out of sight. It was at this point I got off the canal path and onto the road. The person I spoke to on the phone to report it took my details and the descriptions, but seemed to think it wasn't anything worth worrying about, but said it will be investigated. The whole incident has left me a bit unnerved, and I'm pretty sure I won't be jogging that route alone anytime soon. I'm writing this only a few hours after everything happened, now that I've calmed down and the sun is coming up and I feel somewhat safer. Last night I was laying in bed, reading a little before I went to sleep. I think it's important to clarify that I live on the outskirts of my town, still in town, but definitely on the edge, off the highway that leads out of town and into about a 15-mile long stretch of lots of country. Woods, fields, a few residences, but mostly open highway. So other than the other tenants in my actual apartment building, it's normally very quiet in my area. My building is a square with 4 apartments, and for each of us our door simply faces out into the open. There's no lobby or foyer or anything. My door in particular looks out into a large field that goes up a hill. I don't remember the exact time, but sometime between 1 and 2 a.m., someone randomly started banging on my door, which freaks me out at the best of times in broad daylight, but especially in the middle of the night. I nervously went to ask who it was, and this guy with a deep voice claimed he was a police officer and that I needed to let him in. That's what he said, I needed to let him in, not that I needed to open the door. Luckily, I watch and listen to a lot of true crime stuff, so I got pretty suspicious real quick. I just got near instant alarm bells because he couldn't tell me why I needed to let him in, but I supposedly did, and he never asked what my name was. He also didn't really sound like a cop, if you know what I mean. Obviously, I was feeling creeped out, so I called 911 to confirm that there was actually an officer at my address, and they said there wasn't. At this point, I'm freaking out, and I kind of call out through the door that I'm on the phone with the police, and the guy just kind of bangs on my door one more time, then stops making noise. I presume because he ran off at this point. They dispatched 2 cars to my apartment, and the officers took a good look around. Unfortunately, the guy was long gone by the time they got here, and I never saw him, so I don't have a description of him or anything. But the cops said 2 things to make me feel better. 1, they'd post more patrols in my area over Halloween weekend, and 2, it was most likely a Halloween prank because the bar down the street from my apartment had a party and it just closed not too long before. Always trust your instincts, and remember that if you have any doubts about someone claiming to be a police officer, call 911 and confirm they are who they say they are. Dispatch and the officers who came tonight told me you will not get in trouble for making sure the person talking to you is actually an officer. This also applies to situations where it's nighttime and dark, so you can't really see for sure if it's a real cop car behind you or not. If you see flashing lights behind you on a back road or dark area at night, put on your hazard lights and call 911 first to make sure it's actually a police car. You won't get in trouble. Better safe than sorry. Anyway, I hope that anonymous guy was merely a drunken Halloween prankster and not someone who had sinister intentions. Whoever you are, let's not meet. This happened when I was 12 and my brother was 17, and is truly proof that the living are more terrifying than the dead. I think about this every Halloween. This is not a paranormal story. The community I grew up in was made up mostly of Hispanic people, so the folklore of La Llorona was very popular in the area, and especially around Halloween. For those of you who don't know the myth of La Llorona, it is basically a story about a woman who married a rich man, had a perfect life, and then the man cheated on her. She was so distraught that she took her children to the river and drowned them. When she realized what she had done, she threw herself in the river and drowned herself. But she couldn't pass on to the afterlife without her children, so she roams the river looking for her kids. If she spots living children, she will grab them and drown them to take them to the afterlife with her. The story is meant to keep kids from playing in the river. Most of my friends that year were too cool and grown up to go trick-or-treating that year, and were planning on having a party instead. I was really disappointed and asked my brother if he would take me trick-or-treating. He agreed, and we went while it was still light outside, so I would be able to make it to the party before the end of the night. Since we had gone too early, there weren't a lot of people ready to hand out candy, so after a disappointing trek, we started walking back home. On our way home, we passed by a park that had a river running next to it. On Halloween, older teens would usually wait at this park to try to see if they could spot La Llorona. Waiting to spot La Llorona at this particular park was a well-known town tradition that people had done for decades, that still continues to this day. However, there were no kids or teens there yet because it was still kind of early, but there were people in the park putting on a La Llorona play. We decided to stop and watch it. There was really not much of an audience. It seems like it was just us and another few kids who were a part of the group putting on the play who were not in costumes and didn't have trick-or-treating buckets with them. When we sat down, a woman approached us and asked if we were trick-or-treating. I told her we were, and she dropped a small comic book in my trick-or-treat bag and smiled. She seemed very kind and welcoming. The play started, and I got this weird feeling that something was off. The woman playing La Llorona pointed my brother and me out in this tiny audience and asked us what religion we were, to which my brother responded, "Roman Catholic." She then told us that La Llorona was also Roman Catholic and was burning in hell for her sins and rejecting Jesus. She then told us that Halloween was an evil holiday and everyone that celebrated it would burn forever. The play progressed to get weirder and weirder, and including a scene where La Llorona started talking about abortion and held up a fake fetus and pretended to eat it. My brother and I got up to leave, but the people stopped us and started yelling at us to sit down, but we kept going. They started following us down the street, and my brother grabbed my hand and started running because he was afraid they were going to harm us. We finally got to our street, and only about 3 people were still following us, yelling at us about how we were going to go to hell and we needed to accept Jesus. "You need to accept Jesus, you're gonna burn in hell. Accept him, accept Jesus." My brother and I went inside quickly, and he locked the front doors and then frantically ran around the house, making sure all doors and windows were locked before he called our dad at his office. Our dad told us to call the police and that he'd be home in 15 minutes. When my dad got home, the people were still outside chanting and singing some prayer song, asking God to save my brothers and my soul. My dad shooed them away and told them the police would be there any second. They were not deterred and stayed there chanting until the police showed up and threatened to arrest them. I was so freaked out by the events that I decided I didn't want to go to the party, instead just wanted to organize my Halloween candy and put aside all the Snickers for my brother as a thank you for taking me trick-or-treating. Snickers were his favorite. My mom ordered pizza and we sat down to watch Halloween Town. While I went through my trick-or-treat bag, I was halfway through sorting my candy when I came across the comic book that the lady had dropped in there. I opened it up and it truly horrified me. It was a propaganda comic about a little boy who went to a haunted house, ended up being hit by a car on the way home, and went to hell because he hadn't found Jesus. I was really scared, and for weeks as a child, I had nightmares about the events in the comic book. Years later, I asked my mom if she remembered it, and she told me that she couldn't forget, and that she and my father had called the police over it several times. Apparently, for years, the group would leave envelopes with mine and my brother's name written on it, with different weird creepy comic books and handwritten notes about how they were praying for us. Also, invitations to join them in their church and their weird promises about baking us cakes and other creepy ways to entice our child selves into their church. To this day, we can't figure out how they knew our names or who wrote the letters. It really creeps me out that they did this. I told a friend one time about the comic, and he knew exactly what they were. I ended up Googling it and finding the exact same comic online.